great space, really perfect for this sort of event. Thank you, Nikki Gleckis Collective, for partnering with us on lunch. It's delicious. Nikki is the doyenne of catering and events and lifestyle in Fairfield County. Her team is in-house at several locations, including Chelsea Piers. Nikki is known for her terrific menus and healthy Mediterranean style. So thank you very much. And Zibby Owens, welcome to Greenwich. Zibby is, by New York Magazine, New York's most powerful bookfluencer. She is a regular contributor to Good Morning America and other broadcast outlets. Her memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, as well as children's book, Princess Charming, those are her two books that she's written. Beyond being an incredible book fan, Zibby is a graduate of Yale University and Harvard Business School. She lives in New York with her husband, Kyle Owens of Morning Moon Productions, and her 4 children. She began her adventure in books with a 30-minute daily podcast called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books in March 2018. It has won many awards and is regularly in the top 200 of Apple Arts charts. She's hosted 1,300 plus authors on the show, including novelists, actors, memoirists, chefs, athletes, musicians, politicians, thriller writers, business leaders, poets, playwrights, and more. Zibby Media also encompasses, no, but I want them to get they gotta get the whole feel for it. Zibby Media owns Zibby Books, Zibby Mag, Zibby Audio, Zibby Classes, Zibby Retreats, I'll cut to the chase, Zibby's Book Club, and Zibby's Bookshop, which is opening in Santa Monica, coming up very soon. So we're excited to hear about that as well.
We didn't even talk about you.
Deborah, you can talk. I'm going to talk. We'll talk. We'll figure out me.
We're here. This is the main event, is hearing about Deborah Goodrich Royce. Should I be giving your bio? Do you
No,
want
I'll walk them through it.
Okay, you walk them through it.
You want me to start
Yes,
with that? Okay.
yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Zibby, for coming. So, Zibby, I really want to add my kudos just to, first of all, having a Z name. This is my darling daughter, Alexandra, who, when she was 2, called herself Zaza. So we have a Za and we have a Zibby, and I just love the zip of the Z name. So yeah, I'm the writer of this book, this incredible visual. Don't you love that? Yes. We can talk about how you put a spider on a book cover, and Becky Ford is the artist who helped me do that. You can never make a spider too hairy or gross. So we ended up with sort of a silhouette. So I'm an actress turned author. This is my 3rd book. We'll touch on things along the way.
Okay. How many of you have read Deborah's book already? So good, right? Okay, so it's about half. So for the people who haven't read your book, and also this is going to be, if everything records properly, a podcast episode on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. So I'll cover all the bases for people listening to that too. So Deborah, tell us about Reef Road. What is it about?
So, and we're going to get a little dark. On December the 10th, 1948, my mother's best friend was murdered. She was 12 years old, as was my mother. This happened in Pittsburgh in a very working class section called Homewood Brushton. It was a Friday night. It was December. The girls had been to the practice for their Christmas pageant at their church, and my mother thought she would go over to her friend's house that night, and it turned out, for whatever reason, my grandmother said no. The parents of the real girl went bowling. They left her home. They were adamant that they lock the front door, that they lock the back door. And when they returned at 11:30 that night, the back door was ajar, and there was a window, and the shade had been raised. there was a very unsettling 21-minute lag from the moment the parents came home, heard by the neighbors at 11:30, and 21 minutes later when two things happened. The father called the police and the mother ran outside of the house screaming. So we can talk about that 21 minutes if you want to. So I had always known that this had happened. I'd always known it was an unsolved crime, and I had always known that it had created a lot of discomfort and anxiety for my mother. My mom is still alive, and she's fine, but so it had been in my consciousness. I don't think I knew it as a very young child. I'm certain my mother wouldn't have told me when I was little, but at a certain point, it was in my sphere of awareness. So the pandemic locked us down in March of 2020. I know exactly where I was. It was my granddaughter Annabelle's first birthday, and we were all in Florida on Friday, March 13th, and there was that weird moment, remember, we're like, is this like, are we going on? Is this happening? 2 weeks. We're going to do this for 2 weeks. And so there we all were in Florida. I had been on a book tour, so I wasn't able to travel. So I thought this is the moment when I'm actually going to finally research this real piece of not really our family history, but kind of this next door history. So lo and behold, there was a vast amount of material available on the internet, every single newspaper article, and there were a lot covering this crime. It was all there. I was able to reach the University of Pittsburgh and get the coroner's report. I spoke to the Pittsburgh Police Department. They would not release the police report, but I happen to know some things about that, which we can get to. So as I did this research and as I took my notes, I thought, I don't want to write this as nonfiction. I don't want to say what I think happened about this real family. Most suspicion has always fallen on the brother, a significantly older brother. For a 12-year-old girl, he was 7 years older, and those years are meaningful years from 12 to 19. There are all of these questions and answers and testimony and statements and retractions about where the brother was that night. He was supposed to be at work at the railroad yard. And was he there? Was he not there? Did they see him? Did they not? So as I was going through this, I thought, I'm going to write a piece of fiction that, as a theme, really deals with both generational trauma and tangential trauma. But I'm going to make it a thriller, which I like to do, with a twist in it. So Reef Road is a dual narrative of two women, a writer who lives alone with her aging dog in a dreary apartment behind the Publix grocery store in Palm Beach, and a younger woman named Linda Alonso who lives on Reef Road, and she has a very handsome husband from Argentina and two beautiful little children. And about 3 weeks into the pandemic lockdown, they disappear. And the police reveal security camera footage of them in their face masks, getting on a plane bound for Buenos Aires at Miami International Airport, and she can't follow. So the book toggles back and forth between the stories of these two women. You start to figure out what one has to do with the other, and it is set in this very claustrophobic hothouse setting of the pandemic lockdown of 2020.
Wow. So, Deborah, it's one thing to research everything that happened in the house next door and go through that deep dive, but it's another to then use that and make it into such a beautiful novel and figure out who these two women are and all of that. So how did you jump from the actual things that happened into these two characters, and why divide it like that? Why the two viewpoints?
I love a dual narrative. I like dual timelines, and I like dual points of view. I like that peeling of the onion. I like to call my books identity thrillers. That's not really a genre, but I think it applies to a certain type of thriller that is really focusing on puzzles and the secrets that people keep as you bit by bit start to peel the onion and realize what's going on. I like to write a twist, which, you know, the difference between a reveal and a twist, In a reveal, we're in a locked room, one of us gets murdered, one of us is the murderer, and at a certain point, it's revealed who it is. In a twist, you come to the point where you realize, I didn't even know that was what was going on at all. So the 2 points of view. So with the writer, it's first person. Her sections are written like journal entries. She's quite obsessive. She's quite ruminative. And there is certainly a side of myself that I got to indulge. She's fascinated with arcane murder statistics, so I got to go down all these weird rabbit holes about murder, who gets murdered, murders of women, famous murders. But with her, I really wanted to look at that sort of secondhand trauma and what it is. And I've read a book recently called It Didn't Start With You. It's a nonfiction book about epigenetics, and it has blown my mind that at some genetic level, we take on trauma, and it begins with study of mice, and these mice who are exposed to a particular smell and then given electric shocks. 2 generations later, their grandchildren, when exposed to that smell, have reactions of stress and anxiety. They've done a lot of work with children of Holocaust victims. I mean, children who were not there, who didn't experience it. It's a very real thing. So that's what I'm exploring with the writer. With the wife, Linda Alonso, well, I think I had very recently rewatched Body Heat. Have you ever seen that film with William Hurt and Kathleen Turner? I think it was made in the 80s or 90s. It is a steamy film noir. Kathleen Turner is at the peak of her sultriness, and it is set in Lantana, Florida, and it's hot, and they're sweaty, and they're bad. Everyone's bad, but particularly the woman is bad. And so in noir, you really have to pay attention to the woman. You really should look twice at what she's really doing. So I wanted that noir plotline to play out with the wife, and then I wanted to wind it all together and unravel it.
I work with a lot of like 20-somethings, and there are a couple of us who are older on my team, and one of us referenced Kathleen Turner, and like nobody knew who we meant. It was so depressing. But anyway, glad that we all know what we're talking about here. Part of the book really deals with fear of something happening to children, something happening to people you love, and of course, writing this in the context of the pandemic, perhaps that's what it was tapping into. Did you, while you were writing it, need some sort of vehicle for all the uncertainty in the world, and do you feel like you maybe just shoved that into these characters, or was this more of an analytical experiment?
No, it wasn't analytical at all. I think we were living in a state of fear. I mean, raise your hand if you Cloroxed your bananas. We were like, I have to digress because I love the digressions. I keep pointing at my beautiful daughter. We're all in this house together, parents, kids, grandkids, lots of dogs. We had like dog hair tumbleweeds rolling around the house. I'm trying to write, Alexandra's trying to raise a child. So I had a romance with my Roomba. I got a Roomba. It was the only thing that kept us from killing each other because we could sit, and I named him Orlando after a character in another book. But we could put Mr. Orlando to work to clean the house while we were doing our things. But there was terrible anxiety. And I was writing it really day and date with what was going on. And for those of you writers out there, I mean, there's a great piece of wisdom. If you just write down what's going on every day, you're writing history. So I look back at it, and the book isn't about the pandemic, but the pandemic is a fantastic setting for a thriller. It serves to impose the kind of constraints on your characters that wartime would. You know, they're boxed in. When the younger woman's husband gets on the plane and she can't follow him because the borders are closed, that is an obstacle, which is very convenient. And Alice McDermott, in her book, What About the Baby? So you're writing. That's a wonderful book for writers. Annabelle, have you read that? Wendy, have you read that? It's a very good book. So in What About the Baby, she talks about in nonfiction, the work for the writer is to include everything. You have to get it all in there. In fiction, you have to decide what you're writing, what you're telling. It's absolutely limitless. For example, the real murder victim, whose name was Carol, she had 2 brothers, and a friend who read an early draft said, "What's with a second brother?" And so it was confusing. And in fiction, it's very easy to sort of exit stage left, brother number 2. In nonfiction, you can't do that. So I did feel this permeating feeling of anxiety that we were all living in. And I thought, I just didn't see any point to avoid it. I thought it was actually helpful.
Speaking of brothers, talk about why you decided to have the brother come in as this new character and how you ended up writing what came next.
Well, I'm probably not going to talk about that so much, but there is a very strong storyline that has to do with Argentina that I had the opportunity to travel to Argentina about a decade ago with one of my best friends who is half Argentine. And one of the things that just left me shocked and completely riveted, and I never got over it, right in the middle of Buenos Aires is this large military facility that turns out was the detention center in the late 70s and early 80s when the government was rounding up students and leftists and union leaders, and they would hood these people and drive them what they thought were very far distances, but they were imprisoning them right in the middle of Buenos Aires. And again, that's a perfect, the juxtaposition is just so awful. And I really never forgot that. So that whole storyline of those people, they were called the disappeared, makes its way through Miguel's storyline into this book, and it is an important thread that, we'll stop there.
Sorry. Okay, so when you go about writing a book like this and your other books, when you sit down to start it, what comes first? Like, how do you approach the whole project, and do you outline the whole story ahead of time? Do you know what goes on or not? Like, what is your process like?
That's a great question. So the term I've always heard is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you plot it all out or fly by the seat of your pants? But then I was doing a radio show last week, and the host said, do you write with a compass or a map? And I'm not going to forget that. So I write with a compass. I kind of know where I want to go. So it's not fully by the seat of my pants. I think it's a more precise expression. Make a note of that, Wendy. Right? Don't you think? It's a little more precise. So I have a compass. I know certain points I want to have happen, but I don't have a map. I take copious notes, and my notes take the form of what if. What if this happens? Let's say something's going on in this room and somebody gets murdered. So, well, what if somebody walked out of the bathroom at this moment? Or what if that person did this? And at a certain point, when I have enough notes, I'll start writing. But when I start writing, it might change the direction of the notes. And then I do go back and tweak the notes. I also do timelines. Because my books are so non-linear, timelines are really useful. So I write them out, but then I do this weird kind of antiquated thing. Do you remember like month at a page calendars? Mm-hmm. I print them out, and I print them out because they're correct. If you're looking at October of 1975 or June of 2010, the days fall on the date falls on different days of the week. And I start making notes on those, and it is very visually helpful for me to see. My first book, there's an object. There's a necklace on the cover, and the object is a very important plot point, and there's a point after which you cannot see that necklace again. But you can get confused as a writer if you're jumping all around. So I just make a note, July the 5th. Ixnay on the necklace, you just can't see it again. So I go back to that. So those are some of the little techniques I use.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about becoming a writer at this point in your life.
Because I've led a very long life. So I started as an actress. After I went to college, I was a French and Italian major, studied a little bit in France, came home. I was cast in a movie in my college town of Cleveland, and it was a big film with Frank Langella and Tom Hulce, and I was a background dancer. And in the twists of fate, this got me to New York. I came to the city to audition for the choreographer, who was probably, not quite who he said he was when he kept inviting me, come to New York, audition for me. And I took him very literally. So I came to New York, I auditioned for him, I wasn't cast, and I ended up deciding to try acting, and I had a nice run as an actress, about 10 years. I started with a very big role on a soap opera called All My Children that was around for 40 years. So I was on in the early 80s as the sister of the star. Susan Lucci played this character, Erica Kane, and she had this, again, bad sister named Silver, very realistic name, Silver Kane. And I played that, and when I was written out, Paramount Pictures flew me to LA to do this project with Christopher Lloyd. So I had a 10-year run as an actress in film and television. It was great fun, it was very interesting. I recently did CNN because of the true crime component of this book, and they asked for clips from this mini-series I did with Mark Harmon. I played the woman who married Ted Bundy, and very cute Mark Harmon played Bundy. So I spent 3 hours looking. So I don't know if anybody knows how to do this better, but trying to find this very old mini-series. What I came up with on YouTube was like Marcy's movies. So somebody named Marcy had, I don't know, not even by modern technology, she had taped this at home. So I spent the whole evening looking for these clips, which I dutifully got to CNN at 1 a.m, which they then didn't use. But I was glad to see this Mark Harmon thing again, because it was actually good. It held up. So I worked for 10 years as an actress, and then my first husband, who had grown up in Paris, had the opportunity to go there. So in the early 90s, we moved to Paris. Alexandra was a little child. She went to her grandmother's Montessori preschool in Paris, and she had a younger sister, and so we all lived there. And it was the first step in what would lead to my writing career. I was hired by a French film studio as a reader, and this is a basic job that all studios, they keep freelance people who read manuscripts, synopsize manuscripts for the studio heads, and write a page of comments. So I did that, and now we're in 92 and 93 living in Paris. And then we moved back to the States. My first husband was hired by Julia Roberts to run her development company, and I was hired at Miramax to be the story editor, which is like a book editor. So I did that in the 90s, and through these twists and turns, so Miramax in a lot of ways for me was like my writing school. In being in that editorial chair and working with very, very fine writers for that period of years, I really had to figure out what I thought about story and structure and character and everything. So when I left that job, just because it was very taxing as a mother, and we can talk about doing it all or doing it more sequentially, doing it all, doing it sequentially, I ended up going through divorce, getting remarried, moving to Connecticut, and writing all along. There's some of my writing group friends here, and one of the things I found very important was being part of a writing group. I found it a very nurturing environment, and I would strongly advise writers only do that with kind people. You should never do that with unkind people. But in being in a writing group setting, I started to get a feel for my voice. Not that I was modifying my voice for my fellow writers, but I started to notice what they recognized about the way I write. So it was a clarifier for me. And the real turning point came at this magic moment when I was an empty nester. So really in my mid-50s, which was 8 years ago, I thought I will get serious. I had this book in mind. I started telling my friends I was writing a book, and my husband, who's very, makes, modesty a practice, he's like, oh my God, I really wouldn't tell people that. And I said, I can handle it if I don't actually write the book. I will be able to say to my friends, I wasn't putting it in the newspaper. I would be able to say to my friends, if they said, so whatever happened to that book? Nothing. So that was a moment where I really committed myself. And then now I have my third book coming out.
And what are your skincare techniques?
So I do a variety of things. I do see a dermatologist, and I've done fillers and laser and all Botox and all that stuff. I'm older now, so I've done a little more lately. I am in my mid-60s. And, I like SkinCeuticals, all their products, like their B5 gel and that TNS serum and all that stuff. So I feel like, so that is a weird thing, like how much attention do you put into how you look and how much attention do you put into what you're really doing? Obviously, it's what you're doing, which is more important than how you look. But as women, we do have that additional thing sitting on our shoulder about aging, about weight, about skin, about, it's all that. We all have it.
Well, you look amazing. Whatever you're doing, I want to start doing. Anyway, I didn't mean to belittle all of the success of the book, but this is all fun to know. When you think about projects that you still want to do, what little stories or germs of ideas do you have, and what do you want to do next?
I got an email last year from a man, and he began with, "Hey, remember me?" And I'm thinking, not yet. And he said, "I was your best boy on Survival Game," which is a provocative sentence, and a best boy in the movie business is the head electrician. So I knew what he meant. Survival Game was a movie I did with the son of Chuck Norris. Do you young people remember Chuck Norris? He was a famous martial artist movie star in the 80s. So I did a movie with his son. So far, okay, I did that movie. And he said, "Do you remember that Thanksgiving dinner we had together?" I'm thinking, he said, "You were the only actress who didn't have anybody come see her for the holiday." And I thought, well, gosh, poor me. Why did I have nobody come see me? And I don't remember. And then he said, "Do you remember when we saw each other at the Cannes Film Festival?" And now I'm really getting a little nervous. He said, "I was in the British pavilion and you were standing outside and you were holding a baby." And he said, "I looked over and I wondered for a minute if the baby was mine. But I knew it couldn't be possible." And I'm thinking, so I really hope it wasn't possible, because we did not have that nature of a relationship, because I have zero memories, like not a shred. So I thought, okay, so what if you have a woman who has a flawed memory, holes in her memory? Why does she have them? What if this guy comes along? What if he's telling the truth? What if he's not? What if there's something else going on? So right now I'm calling it Best Boy. Someone asked me last week, "Are you going to tell that guy you're writing this book?" I said, I don't know. He's a writer too. No, the guy is real. The real guy is real. But in the book, I don't know. It might be something different. So I'm working on that.
Looking like a DNA test is in the future. Anyway, I know you've given advice on doing a writing group, and the way that you do the calendars is brilliant. Do you have any advice for someone just starting out? I guess this lady over here, somebody who's trying to be a writer. what else would you say at the very beginning?
I would say pay attention to your time, block out your time in ways that you can really change the way you organize your time. Don't say, I'm going to write from 9 to 5 every day if you can't really write from 9 to 5 every day. We've got Avery over here who has a book coming out, and she's a young mom. I don't know how she does it, but she can tell that story. So what I did really starting is I used my trusty devices and I blocked out windows of time. For me, 3 hours is the minimum. It's hard for me to get my head really into something in under 3 hours. People in my writing group would sometimes do 10 minutes a day challenges and stuff. I need at least 3 hours, and I can go about 6. So I would block it out on my calendar, and just really, because I'm very obedient, I would obey my phone. And the other thing I would do is go into a different part of my house. I have a home office that's off my kitchen, but the kitchen is noisy and trafficked and busy. And I have this beautiful conservatory on the other end of the house where we used to have lovely dinners before I took it over. It's a beautiful room. It looks out on a river. I write way down there. I have this giant round table. I like paper. I like to do all my research on the computer, and often I'll print it out and spread it out. There's something visually for me, and people use all kinds of computer organizational techniques for their research. I just respond to seeing it there. My eye will latch onto something and remember something that I don't know I'm looking for. I think that's something about paper that's very helpful. Because I write in a glass room, I don't have the walls that some authors have to stick things on. So I use those metal mesh trolleys that you can use to organize your garage or your pantry, and I just spread papers out there and on the table. So I'm a paper spreader.
And are there any books that you've read lately that you're obsessed with or that everybody should read, or just authors who you've always long admired?
So I've been on a Joyce Carol Oates binge lately. I came late to the table with Joyce Carol Oates, and maybe it's a generational thing. She's enough older than I am that I wasn't really keyed into her when I was younger. And her writing is so supremely gorgeous, and she switches genres in a way that I like. I don't like to be bound by one thing or another. I just read Charming Billy by Alice McDermott, which is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life. And I was late to the table with that. So I'm always reading like you, but those are a couple that really stand out strongly for me now.
Would you like to open it for questions? Can we do it? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we were both readers in the film business, and the question is, do I write visually? I do, but I don't like writing screenplays. I don't like the mechanics or the format of it, so I like to write novels, but I see it very visually. Yeah, completely. Mm-hmm. I also like to write real places, and that's people make one choice or another to fictionalize a place or write the real place. But I always kind of jump out of my seat when another writer is writing a place that I recognize. I just think, oh, and you fictionalize Annabelle. So it's just a choice, one thing or the other. And my husband's always telling me whatever place I put in a book that we're going to get kicked out. So he said we were going to get kicked out of Watch Hill. Now we're going to get kicked out of Palm Beach. I don't live in LA anymore. We didn't get kicked out of there. But I'm setting Best Boy in Greenwich, by the way. So just so you know. To the guy. I'm like, hi, hey, how are you? Because I don't remember him. So I didn't know what to say. And he's quite handsome. I showed Lee, my wonderful assistant Lee, I said, look at him, he's rather cute. And didn't he write about motorcycles or something? Yeah, he's a... Yeah, my guy. That's a good question. So they're distinctive points of view, and you go back and forth. And did I write one all the way through and go back and add the other? Or no, I write it as you read it. So maybe because I was on a soap opera. Soap operas are all about the cliffhanger. You know, they always have that organ, and then people staring at each other. So I put a lot of attention into the transition of one chapter to the next. And for me, it's very helpful to write it as I read it. I've got all the notes and the timelines in the chronological order and separated out in different ways. But when I'm writing the book, I write it as you're going to read it.
So when you decided to write about a crime, did you have to do anything special to feel comfortable writing in that genre? Because it's so new to you, or are you comfortable?
So did I have to do anything to write about a crime because it's new to me? No, because, well, first of all, I've known about this crime my whole life. And so I'm writing it from a point of view of a woman who is obsessed with it. I'm not writing in the voice of an FBI agent or a police officer, that would maybe be something really different that I would have to do. So she's just obsessively looking at all this and picking it apart. So I just had to go way into my own head, which was easy.
When I was reading this book, by the time I got to the last 50 pages, my heart was in my throat. And everybody I've talked to has felt the same way reading this book. Did you have a hard time coming down from that? Like, you're writing this book that's going to give me a heart attack, and then you have to go out for dinner and talk to normal people.
Yeah, so it's always a weird transition when you stop writing at the end of the day to shake it loose. Yeah, I find that I have to be a little bit quiet and process a little bit. But not, for me, it's nowhere near as hard as when I was a young actress on All My Children, and it was my first job, and I played such a crazy character day in and day out, and I was so in the headspace of that one character that it was a little harder to keep my equilibrium. It was very difficult. I was not in good equilibrium then at all, but I feel I am more now, and I don't know if that's a life stage or the fact that I'm sort of diving into different characters' heads and not just one. I don't know. It's a good question.
Anybody else?
Becky.
I was fascinated by how not likable either of your female protagonists were. And yet I loved your book.
So that's an interesting question. I do like all my characters, but their behavior is not really good. So, but the writer really, really loves her dog, and the wife really, really loves her children, and those are their redeeming qualities. But yeah, I mean, it's an indulgence of a certain point of view, and people a little out of control. Louisa. So this is Becky Ford, who is not only a writer, but she's really one of the most talented painters I've ever met in my life. And I have many of her paintings in my house here and in Florida. So, and Becky's part of my writing group, and we connected on covers early on, and I'm with a smaller publisher distributed by Simon & Schuster, and I don't like their covers at all. So I was able to just take control, and I worked with Becky on all three. And what we ended up with, and we went down a lot of rabbit holes, many, many different ideas, and Becky really worked them through. Each cover is something beautiful, generally speaking, a flower or a face, and then something's wrong. So this is quite gorgeous, these birds of paradise, but they're off-center, and the background's really black. And then the spider in the middle. And we looked at earlier versions, and in a weird way, if the flower were centered and smaller, it looks like literary fiction, right? It just completely changes the tone of what it is. So by the flower being oversized, and do you see how the leaf is stabbing my name? So there's a little bit of violence to it, which is good. We had a lot of fun doing all that.
Anybody else?
Throughout all three books, and I've said this before, I love your writing because I can visualize it. I'm a movie person, but I learned something different. I learned something from the book, like because you're so meticulous in your research, like whether it's about a place or like the Chaldeans or about Ruby Falls, like is that something that you set out to do? Like, I love a book that not only entertains, informs, and it sort of educates somebody.
So I think I'm just following the things I'm interested in. And if you remember in Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield was talking about his teacher. And when they were in class and kids would stand up to talk, they were meant to yell at each other and say, digression, if somebody went off subject. And Holden Caulfield said, but I like those digressions. I think I like the digressions. And so, and that's very indulged with the writer. And I didn't know if it would work because the writer's voice is very meta. She is self-referential, she's referring to writing, she's talking to the reader at certain points. And so I had a lot of questions when I was writing this, if it was just too out there. I mean, there are other people who do things like that. To look at the most exalted example would be The French Lieutenant's Woman, which is a novel that has a very meta voice of, well, if you haven't read it, I won't tell you. But so I was a little nervous about treading on that territory, but so far people seem to like it. Yes?
This is kind of a question about, some of these really lucky people get to create these wonderful stories where the characters naturally go on and on, sort of like Downton Abbey and Julie Fellows, where he took, Gosford Carpenter to Downton Abbey, which is such a stroke of genius. But I think this is a question about, we all want to keep writing, want to keep going. Did you ever think of taking one of your characters or one of your stories and trying to make it a Downton Abbey? Not even a TV show, but just, the book that goes on and on with the whole story and a family. Did anything ever, because I think that's
Right.
a nice way to keep your career going.
So the question is about sequels. Have I seen a sequel to any of my books? Not yet. The first one, Finding Mrs. Ford, could go on. The other two, I don't see it so much.
Well, I have to say, Deborah, I have so much respect for you, not just in your ability to write beautifully, speak beautifully, how you help so many other authors with your series at the Ocean House every summer, and all the way you support all these other people. It's really amazing, and all the good you do with the restorations. And you're just such a multifaceted, really interesting, awesome woman. So thank you for inviting me here, and I hope everybody here has bought a copy from Diane's bookstore over there of Reef Road, and give it as gifts and everything else. And I just want to say congratulations.
Thank you, Zibby. It's always a joy to see you. Thank you. Thank you all.